Hello, and welcome to the Youth at the Table podcast. This podcast focuses on empowering young individuals and amplifying their voices. Its primary objective is to highlight the stories of youth who are making a positive impact in their communities and deserve more recognition. We're very happy to have Ritika Saraswat with us. Hi, Ritika, how are you?
I am good. How are you? Very excited to be on here and looking forward to the kind of discussions we have today.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you here. I think for our very first question, I would like you to introduce yourself to our audience and share more about what you do these days.
Yeah, no, definitely. I hope I don't go too overboard because I have a tendency to speak too much. But
No
a
problem.
bit
We're
about
all
me
here
would
to
be
listen.
no, a bit about me would be I'm originally from India, specifically Pune in India, and I came to Canada about 6 years ago with the whole idea of becoming a doctor because I come from a South Asian background, and we are taught from a young age that doctor, lawyer, and engineer are the three ways to kind of achieving success and also creating an impact in the world. So just believing those ideologies, I came here to pursue that education like a science one. But then I think soon coming to North America, I realized that like impact lies beyond a profession, and it comes down to how you make the most of where you're at and what you do. So upon realizing that, I kind of just kept myself open to trying different opportunities, and I think one thing led to another, and I started working in the business side of things, specifically starting with freelance consulting that I did for a few startups and non-for-profits in Canada and in the US. I did that for 2 years, and then I followed that up with another 2 years working in the higher education space. That's where I basically put together certain mentorship programs for international students. So I think like that kind of 2 years that I spent, I realized a lot of things from it. One of the main things was, or the main takeaways was that if you're not a business or a commerce student, no one really teaches you about networking. No one teaches you about communication, problem solving, etc. And I think I felt like those skills are like those real world skills, as you would call it, which are necessary, right? Irrespective of whatever profession you go into. So I think upon that realization, I started my organization called Redefined, not just to help international students upskill themselves irrespective of the educational background they come from, but also to give them access to opportunities in the form of events, workshops, seminars, conferences, fellowship programs that enable them to even apply the knowledge that they are gaining at school, and through the other educational information that they're getting. So we've been around for 1.5 years, and in addition to focusing on students, we also do a lot of work to give back to the underprivileged communities, both in India and a few countries in Africa like Ghana, Nigeria, and Uganda. And yeah, I currently also work at Deloitte as a part of the human capital consulting team. I've been here 7 months now, but yeah, I
That's
think that'd be a bit
amazing.
about me.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I really relate to this story of, having that background of thinking that, education is mostly about being a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, and then figuring out there is a lot more people can do in this world.
Yeah.
So I totally relate to that as well. I think I kind of had the similar journey. When I first attended UBC, my goal was to get into med school, and I was interested in medicine. But as I got to know the profession more, not that it's a bad profession, I really respect it, but I just understood that it's not for me. And I had to understand and learn there are other ways to make impact, which we're here to talk
Yeah.
about. So can you share more about your advocacy journey and the passion for positive change? What are the things that you've, I guess, worked on, I guess, in your organization, Redefined? And if you can explain more about Redefined itself and how it was founded.
Yes. No, definitely. So a bit about Redefine and how it was founded comes back to kind of a little bit about my story as well. As I mentioned, like one of those motivations was a kind of giving students, irrespective of the background they come from, the opportunity to kind of pursue or develop certain skill sets and even apply those in particular experiences, which traditionally have been reserved for students coming from those business backgrounds. But at the same time, I think coming myself here as an international student, from like a South Asian background, being especially like a woman, I felt like I faced a lot of challenges in the sense of like a lot of stereotypes and judgments as well, time and again, in terms of what my capabilities were, certain stereotypes around who I would be, like what I am, how smart am I, and other things. And I felt the need to kind of have to keep redefining myself, because how do I say, I think a lot of us, based on how we look, our nationality, etc., have a lot of assumptions based on how we are, who we are. And I think sometimes that can influence our own self perception. So I feel like I wanted to create a space where students get the opportunity to connect with others like themselves, coming from similar backgrounds, similar nationalities, and learn that and realize maybe that, hey, if they can do it, I can do it as well, right? It was all about creating those role models that people can resonate with and identify with. So for that purpose, it just seemed best to kind of create that kind of community of people. So that's why, like, redefined, that was one of the motivations, and that's why our name also redefined, was this whole idea of enabling people to move beyond the definitions laid on us by others, but then kind of realizing our potential and capabilities and redefining what those limits look like for us.
Very
So I would
beautiful.
say that is the whole idea.
That's very beautiful and amazing. I think now learning more about the concept behind redefine, it just makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense because as you mentioned, there is this quote that says you can't be what you can't see, and creating those role models and connecting
Yeah.
people to people from their similar background or people who have been in the same, I guess, school or have dealt with the same challenges can very much boost one's confidence and see that things can change, and that's very amazing. So if you would like to, I guess, share with what do you think one of the biggest challenges that you face in your work, or you think youth face when it comes to advocacy and founding their own organizations? What is something that you would want to say about that?
Okay. So more so like a challenge being a founder of a non-for-profit, or more so like
Yeah.
a challenge from a student's perspective?
Any challenge that you've seen within the journey, anything that you would like to share and think it should change for the better.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest, I don't know if this is a challenge, but the reason we're also kind of focused on the education piece in a way is because I think that in itself is a challenge. Today with so many changes happening in the job market, in the world overall, even with AI coming into the picture, I feel like so many things need that redefining happening. And I feel like we're redefining a lot of things except for education. Education, if you still see today, is still the same traditional format as it was before. Everyone's giving the same type of examination, everyone's giving the examination in the same format, right? And I think these expectations are also the same. So I feel like I don't know if it's a challenge necessarily, but I think that's the biggest issue I feel that exists today, is like, I think we need to up our game when it comes to education. I don't think we can no longer follow the traditional route, because with chat GPT into the market, which can produce all the regular information which is there, any student could get an A plus, right, by just kind of copy pasting or just being really smart on how to use that platform and get those grades that they want. And if we keep using grades as the determining factor for success in education, we're bound to not be identifying the right people. So I think even switching our focus from grades to actually learning, and making learning the criteria or the goal to assess how successfully someone has understood something, I think that's a big mindset shift also needed. And that's something like we at Redefine at least are hoping to move forward towards. But obviously, that issue in itself becomes a challenge for us when we try to do
Yeah.
that, because it's like these institutions are based on the traditional format. And it makes sense sometimes, because when you're such a huge institution catering to about 60,000 or more students, it can be difficult to cater to each and every individual's needs and learning styles, right? But I think that should be no excuse to not do something at all. I always say, even co-op experiences, for example, they are made more readily available to students from particular educational backgrounds than others. And secondly, I feel like they should no longer be restricted to just universities. I think students in a high school, in fact, should also have co-op programs existing so that they get to experience these things. These days, entrepreneurs are like 14 years of age, right? So the age has reduced to that young. So that means we need to also be making opportunities accessible at that particular age bracket. So I would say that's the issue that also becomes a challenge for us.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think with my own experience, I can totally relate to that. And I think education is very different from working in a field. And I can say certainly not that education hasn't helped me, but the things that
Yeah,
I've learned during working and being employed or just meeting people and in my
yeah,
networking has been far more usable for me in some aspects. So I think it's very important to work on those kind of skills of communication, networking, and being able to work with a team member and being a good team player. All of these are things that we need to focus on because, as you mentioned, with us moving into the future and the role of I think
yeah,
people can have access to a lot of things they want to learn. It now comes how they want to use it and what do they do with those skills. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. So I wanted to ask, if times go back, would you choose the same path? Or if not, what would you change?
I like this question. I like to also feel like I don't regret anything, in a way. Um, because technically, if you look at it, if I changed things, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yes, I
Right, and
agree.
I'm grateful for where I am today because of some of those even mistakes or wrong decisions that I may have made at that time. So yeah, technically I wouldn't want to change anything, but I think from an organizational perspective, if I look at things, or from even like a personal and professional growth perspective, I think if there's one thing I would change is start networking a lot earlier. I got to know about LinkedIn when I was in my fourth year of university. And when I look back about the amount of impact it has had on my life, the opportunities I've gotten through it, whether it be jobs, whether it be awards, conferences, etc., I feel like a lot of that could have been amplified had it been a lot earlier. And I think a big reason for that not happening earlier was the lack of exposure and even the lack of access to people educating that something like this is important. And I think maybe me being from a science background played a big role in that, because no one thought of that to be very important. What
Yeah.
people thought was important was you putting a nose deep into textbooks, right? So I think yeah,
Totally
I would
relatable.
say if I could change that, it'd be that. You
No,
relate to that?
yeah, 100%. Because I think as a science student, focus on self-branding and amplifying your
Yeah,
voice in social media or different networking is not, I guess, taught well enough, or
yeah,
I mean, emphasized enough because you usually tend to just be studying and you have your own circle of other students who are also just studying. And
yeah,
so, yeah, it's very important. And I think there should be more done in terms of just teaching young people how to use these tools and how to use it to their
yeah.
benefit. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. In your opinion, because I know you're a very active person in your community and actively looking of ways to give back and running your own organization and also working with Deloitte, how can you, I guess, suggest for other youth to get involved in their communities? What would you recommend? How do they start?
I think the first step is getting started. I know it sounds silly, and some people are like, this so confusing. But I think whether it be entrepreneurship, whether it be anything in life, I think the best way to start is to start, if that makes sense. I think a lot of us spend a lot of time just analyzing things or thinking if this will work, if this won't work. What is the other person going to think about me, right? If this happens, what if I fail? People are going to think I'm a joke. There are so many questions of these sort that come to our head, and I think they lead us to not even taking action in the first place, and then leave us with asking others questions of how do I start. So I think, like, I've realized is like the best way is, if you have an idea, if you want to do something, just get started on the process, whether it be A start would mean reaching out to people who are in that space to understand how have they got started on their journeys. Another way would be is, let's say for example, if you want to start a nonprofit of your own, a great way to get started is start checking online what are the legal procedures to set up a nonprofit for yourself, right? Identify what are the funding you may need to register yourself as a non-for-profit here. Another step may be to identify, okay, what is the biggest challenge that we are experiencing here in Canada, in my particular city, right? Let's say if it's hunger and food insecurity, okay, maybe talking to food banks is a good idea, right? How many people are coming in every single day? So I feel like just whatever that getting started looks for you, but taking some form of an action from day one, I think is what really helps us get to where we want to be, in specific to volunteering and creating social impact, but also in general in life, right? So I would say like, taking those first steps through like a primary research perspective as well, and even through your secondary research of talking to people to get that guidance and that vision. I think yeah, I would say the best way to start. Secondly, I would say is like, in addition to that, I think a good way is also is being aware of what you really want to do. I think a lot of students sometimes go behind trends. Like I've spoken to so many people who tell me, Ritika, oh, I'm doing this because my friends are also doing it.
Yes.
But I say like, okay, what about this motivates you though? I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm just doing it because others are doing it. So I would say like, also give time to yourself to figure out what you really want to do, and right, what kind of social impact area you want to work within. Just because today you're seeing so many change makers in the market doesn't mean you have to become a change maker, right? And just because ESG today is on trend technically doesn't mean you have to enter the ESG space. I see so many change makers today who are shifting a lot of initiatives to align with ESG, or who are maybe doing more initiatives in that space. And a big part of it is why climate and sustainability is important every all year round, right? It has been an important
Yeah.
aspect every time. Why is it becoming getting more importance now? And I feel like what I've realized is when one thing gets importance, other things kind of get ignored sometimes, or kind of get left out. So I feel like being very clear and knowing what you really want to do, what is something you're passionate about, because when you know that, that's when you can really bring yourself also well to work every single day and actually keep taking the right steps towards it. So I would say it's a combination of the two.
I agree. I think what you mentioned about finding your true passion is something that you really want, like youth need to focus on because, first of all, there's a lot of opportunities out there. And if you want to
Yeah,
do everything, it's just going to be very overwhelming and you would just
yeah,
be doing projects here and there and it wouldn't come to a good conclusion. But if you have
yeah,
like a path planned or know what you want to achieve in mind, that's much better. And also, as you mentioned, I guess following your best friends and other youth who like are
yeah,
doing something, although it may be fun and like you feel like you have a bond with those people, ultimately, if it's not your passion, it wouldn't work because
exactly.
no, and I think you know the best how much of hard work it needs and how it's like you have to stay up late or not sleep and plan a lot of things and go have a lot of stress. So not having
Yeah,
that passion to push you to do these things, it just wouldn't work. So yeah, thank
yeah.
you so much
And
for
I feel like just adding one point to what we just said is like, also you don't have to just start something of your own every time. I
yeah,
feel like when a lot of people think of going into the social impact space again, because we're seeing so many people becoming founders, so many people entering entrepreneurship, you're seeing this need among students to want to just be a founder for everything, right?
yes, yes,
But I feel like it's always look around yourself, look around your surroundings. If there are other organizations who are doing exactly the work you want to do, collaborate with them, join them, help them take further, help take them further in the journey, right?
yes,
Bring your value through that perspective. I always say, if you think what you want to do is at least 1% different, then do something of your own. Because technically, if someone is already doing what you want to do, you will be the biggest asset to that organization or to that company if you join them, because you're also passionate in that same space and they already have the resources and the base planned out already. All you have to do is just accelerate that. So I feel like also being yeah, not pushing yourself into things just because you feel like you need to, or just you feel like you have to, right? Being clear on that is also important.
100%. And also, just to add to that, from my own experience,
Yeah,
I didn't think of founding Talk Mental Health Foundation before I volunteered for 3 to 4 years in different non-for-profit
yeah,
organizations. And I learned how they work, what they do, and how much of a difference Talk Mental Health can be, and how much of it is aligned with other organizations. So I think
yeah,
what you mentioned is very important. Gaining that experience from volunteering and joining other organizations is very crucial. So yeah,
yeah.
thank you so much for sharing that. So we've come to our last question. I wanted to ask you to please feel free to share anything you're interested in and we didn't touch upon. If you have any recommendations for our audience who are mostly young people listening, and yeah, we're happy to listen.
I would say in terms of I don't know if it's a recommendation, but just like a tip is, I think I always say this to people, is focus on things you can control. No matter where you're at today, whether if it's your professional career, whether it's your personal life, whether it's a social initiative you want to take, I think aligning to your question back again of how do I get started, because I think that's the first thing, right? If you want to get to the 100%, you need to know how do you get to the first 1%. And I think the best way to know that is by focusing completely on yourself, in the sense of not being selfish, but focusing, okay, what are the things I can control in this factor? If I want to start a nonprofit, what is something I can control about it? Well, I can control the research I put into it. I can control the contacts that I built that I can later on leverage to build collaborations, right? What I cannot control is maybe if I do register my non-for-profit, will it be accepted or not? How soon will it be accepted or not? If I apply to grant, will they be accepted or not? That's not something you can control, right? When you reach out to someone, will they respond back with a positive reaction? That's something you cannot control. So I would say, like, no matter what stage of life you're at, focus on things that are within your control, because that also what it helps do is it builds a sense of self-confidence within yourself and a level of self-efficacy, because every time you accomplish what you set for yourself and things that are within your control, you will be able to do it, right? Definitely, it's within your control, you'll be able to do it, and when you achieve it, it brings that self-confidence up. But when you start focusing too much on things that lie beyond your control, which are mostly results, that's when your self-confidence gets compromised. And I feel like when your self-confidence and self-image is compromised, that's detrimental to your overall success. Because I feel like in life there are too many people to pull you down. So if you yourself are putting yourself down, I just feel like there's no scope then, right? Because there are so many people to
Yes,
walk over. So I think keeping that
exactly.
balance is important. And just sharing something which I think we are very excited of what we are working on right now is we are currently running like this fundraiser actually to build a school in Pakistan. We're looking to raise about $1,200. That is how much you can build an entire school for, which caters to
Wow.
about 150 200 people, which was shocking to me. So I feel like I would just say is like, every dollar counts. Also to people who want to give back but don't have the time, I mean, you can always make the time, but let's say if you don't, I would say is like even giving back to organizations which are just starting out, are creating those grassroots movements, and even a dollar, I think, makes a huge difference, right? If that $1 means a child getting an extra seat to sit at a class, why not? So another thing to think of. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think if you know how much of an impact a dollar can make in some people's lives,
Yeah.
it's very important to think of it. And also remembering that we should ourselves, youth, be our own cheerleaders, because if we don't believe in ourselves, then who would? And I think
Yes.
focusing on what we can control is very important as well, because in today's world, there's a lot of things that we can't, but at least there are things that we can control. And that also reduces our anxiety, because we know we're controlling the things we know we can control, and we're not focusing on things that we just don't know what would be the outcome. So yeah, thank you so much for those wise recommendations. And I personally wish very everything going well with your projects. And I hope that we see more things happening with Redefine. Thank you so much for accepting to be on our podcast. It was amazing to talk to you. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on board. And I wish the best of luck to everyone who's watching this. And I think you all are slayers and everyone's going to slay it. Just know you can do it.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Amazing. Okay.